Tidbits toward the tribulation. We've been talking about prophecy and looking at things that are going on in the news. And I hate to keep saying it, but it is just astounding the last few months how things have changed. Now, last year, of course, was a huge change worldwide. I don't think any of us have any really a point of reference to understand how much last year changed. But in the last, since the election, things have really at breakneck speed be changing. So we're going to begin in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 1. Paul, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly, that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils." Now I want to point out to you that he's talking about in the church so-called. He's talking about believers so-called, apparent churches and believers. And he said some of them are going to depart from the faith. And they're going to give heed to seducing spirits. Literally doctrines of devils. Speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meats. Wow. And so we're right there, aren't we? If you're a vegan, good for you, because that's what's coming. Which God hath created to be received with thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth. So there's a lot there. But we're going to talk about some tidbits that are going to all be related to the tribulation that I believe is just near up on us. And in a scary fashion, the Psalm 83 war that is going to clear out things for Israel at the beginning of the tribulation time, I think may be the next thing we see. Now, we could see the temple begin to be rebuilt. That could happen before the tribulation begins, but all these things could happen after too, but that Psalm 83 war, I think we might see upon us. And remember, that's the war that's going to take out that inner circle of opposition to Israel, right around Israel. But there is the larger ring of Islam and opposition, Turkey, and for that Russia. That's going to be later on during the tribulation. So tonight I'm going to bring up some things that may bring more questions, but we need to think about them that will help us to be more prepared for what is upon us. So we've got some emerging dangers that are fairly unique. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these, but the danger from asteroids and heavenly bodies, I thought it was being much overblown over the years so they could make movies and make money. And I'm sure that's true. But the more I dig into it, the more there is. So here's what I have figured out that I didn't know before. They lead us to believe they can track these things. They can calculate with all their mathematical genius and they actually don't. Because things can change trajectory that will affect things months and even years later. For example, Apophis is supposed to be coming in 2029. And it was originally thought that it might hit us, and now it looks like it's going to be several hundred kilometers from us, which is not really very far. When you think of astronomical perspective, several hundred kilometers is pretty close to the Earth. But there are things that may change its trajectory, and the next time it swings around, it could hit us. And there are some strange things going on causing it to accelerate. But my discovery was that there are a lot more of those things out there. In fact, it occurred to me why Star Trek and warp drive can't work. They'll never do Star Trek type warp drive because the universe is a really cluttered place. There's just jillions of these asteroids and meteors and stuff that are out there. I had no idea how cluttered it was. So anyway, that's my Star Trek insertion. But those dangers are upon us, which I guess goes to simply, biblically, that over in the book of Revelation, it talks about those stars falling from heaven. So those are not just theoretical things. Those are not just symbolic things. They're symbolic of something. There's something that's actually going to fall from the heavens. And now I want to talk about the declining birth and fertility rates. How many of you knew that that globally in the world we are in a decline with birth rate and fertility rate? Did you know that? I did not know that until just recently. If you would pay attention to all the population alarmists, we're about to stand next to each other and there's too many of us. But we're actually globally declining, and this is going to feed into something that we're going to talk about. And then the fertility rates. We don't do fertility rights around here. Fertility rates is even more scary and interesting. And so in Genesis 1:26, we're told, this is the first mandate from the Lord, and it's not changed. God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion. It is our God-given right to have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. How? With two options. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So my dad and I used to go round and round about that word replenish. He always said, this is evidence that there were generations and peoples before the peoples that we have now. And he got off on that. He just would go to seed on that. And I could never, sometimes he just would not listen to me. It was like having a child. Anyway, but replenish does not mean that it was taken out and you're restoring it. God's saying, fill it up. That's all he's saying. Fill it back up. And we're in that process now. So here is a picture of the global fertility crisis that the Biden administration probably won't use, but I'll use the word crisis. All those squiggly little lines, those are all the different nations of the world, and that shows their particular trajectory. But that red line shows the global, when you put it all together, would you call that the mean? Would that be the right term? So that's where world population is going. And I found that fascinating. That's just so different from what we're being led to believe. And that's through 2017, and that continues to this day as well. In fact, it's a whole interesting discussion to think about what a recession or what happened in 2020, that kind of thing, does. It's been debated and contemplated. A recession usually causes fewer children. People get freaked out. I'm not going to have a child when things look so bad. Well, last year was one of those. But it was thought that because we were all locked in, we'd have something to do that would result in more children. We'll put it that way. But that didn't turn out to be the case. It doesn't seem to be the case. So this is just an example of some. And the thing to remember, and this is a whole science that actually I have to pay attention to really understand, not as simple as it seemed like. But the global replacement fertility rate, in other words, in order for a nation to replenish, replace, to fill back up and move forward, or just to stay even, a woman has to have 2.3 children. It would just be 2, but occasionally children die, right? So it really gets kind of complicated to calculate it. So Hong Kong is at 1. They're going backwards fast. You see the other nations there. Canada, 1.4. It's interesting that the United States is also declining. You know, the only thing that's keeping us from not actually declining is immigration, legal and illegal. Wouldn't it be a hoot if it's immigration that saves us from Islam? Anyway. Well, the people coming from Mexico, Guatemala, they're not going to be Islamic, they're going to be Catholic. So they don't have the background for which they're going to be going into that. Anyway, that's just an interesting perspective. So here's the United States as of 18. And so there's the birth rate and the fertility rate. They're not the same. And hence the interesting discussion. We have the gray line at the top, which is the women of childbearing age in the United States going up. But the population, the children, are not following that. Births is pretty easy to understand. People were told to have 2 children, don't have more. We're told better to have no children, right? So births is pretty easy to understand. We're doing it to ourselves. But the fertility rate, that's the one that I think, if we had the time, would be even more fascinating. Why do we have more women of fertility age who are not fertile? I think there's multiple answers to the question, and we're going to get to that in just a moment, but I found it a little bit startling and maybe feeding into what's going to take place during the tribulation as well. So, why does the decline matter? The problem of the low fertility is that it reduces population size not at all ages, but only among the young. Translation, if I could do this. So, let me give you a maxim. Now, you'll need to think about this. As Pogo said, sometimes I thinks, and sometimes I sits, and sometimes I sits and thinks, and sometimes I just sits. Right. So you have to think about this. Here it is. The longer you live, the more likely that you're going to live long. Okay? There's a lot more there than it seems like. The longer you live, the more likely you're going to live long. What I mean by that is you get over hurdles. So babies die in birth. Okay, they die there. Next, 4 or 5-year-old, 6-year-old children die of because they're vulnerable. They die of disease. Okay, so as you get past hurdles, you get a more dynamic, a more powerful, a more healthy, I guess you could say, group of people. The more of those, you get to be 18, you've made it out of college, and your father didn't take you out. You know, you get past those hurdles, right? So if you get up to 50 and 60 and you haven't had a heart attack and die, and that's when that kind of thing starts. If you don't, you're probably a lot more likely to live into your 80s and 90s and on. So the longer you live, the more you've overcome, which is going to make it more likely that you will live long. Okay, that's kind of an interesting little maxim, and I came up with it on my own. Anyway, so as the fertility rate is low, that means the older population is going to reach a point where they're going to die off, and you're not replenishing them on the bottom end. And they tell me, well, just go on with what I pulled out. Low fertility produces an age structure that creates a momentum for future population decline, a situation that must be stopped at some point if the population is to be demographically sustainable. Also, populations with low fertility can fall in size at an extremely rapid rate. The longer low fertility is maintained, the harder it becomes to reverse population decline. I think the simple way to say that, to understand it, is you reach a tipping point that you will decline exponentially quick. Okay, we're in that trajectory. If something doesn't change, it looks to me like. So why is there a global decline? There are some interesting factors about that. First, this decline is mostly among educated, industrialized, and more affluent nations. Okay? This is not happening in African nations. They're still having far more than 2 babies for each woman. Okay? That's not happening in America or China or Russia. You know, the industrialized, educated, and I threw that in there on purpose. Educated, industrialized, and more affluent. Okay. The education has been to have fewer children. So we've gotten smarter. We've gotten so smart that we have educated ourselves not to have babies. That's the way to go. That's the lazy way to go, said the man. So, education, affluence, that feeds into abortion. One of the reasons for the global decline is because we have taken, and America has been a driving force, Bill Gates' foundation has been a driving force to take abortion worldwide. Okay? So, the affluent part of it I threw in there because if you can't afford to do it, you won't do it, right? And this is the reason why the Democrats and the left are forever crying, we need to protect women's health rights. Translation, they need to be able to kill their babies without having to pay for it. That's a one-to-one translation. Whenever you hear the Democrats and the left say we need to protect women's health rights, what they mean is we need to pay for killing their babies. You ever notice sin, we always say it a different way so it sounds more palatable? You know, I didn't have an affair. I didn't commit adultery. I had an affair. So the affluence feeds into that. And thank you. Thank you. Now your tax dollars are paying for countries outside the United States to be able to get abortions. Thank you. Throw something at me. That's really not funny, is it? And in the military, as an aside, in the military now, we're having to pay for transgender surgeries, which in decades gone by, the Psychiatric Association in America said that that was child abuse. What we're doing with children now. So, abortion accessibility. But then there is the fertility rate, the more fascinating that I'm not really qualified to talk about. I just have questions. Is this self-inflicted? Are we having more women of childbearing age and fewer that can have babies? Because of some things we are doing to ourselves. I'm just raising them as questions. I don't know. I'm sure that the genetically modified food does play into it. I'm convinced of that. I think there's actual science behind that. And the vaccinations, I hate to throw any gasoline on the anti-vaxxers for, I hate to do that, but it is unknown what the vaccinations are doing completely. You know, and the vaccination that we've got going on right now, I can't tell you that it's going to cause more women to be infertile. I can't tell you it's not. It hasn't been long enough. We don't know. Hasn't been tested. And we've never done a thing like this to ourselves. So, the chemicals. I guess I didn't put anything in there about that. Let me back up. There's something called forever chemicals. Have any of you ever heard of that? I didn't know about it until recently, and it's kind of scary. And I don't mean to just be negative, try to scare you all the time. I'm just trying to give you a heads up on things. things to pray about, things to get ready for. These forever chemicals. Does anybody remember that movie they made about the woman who shrunk?
Uh-huh.
Okay, that was supposed to be because she was involved in these chemicals, washing our hands and our hair, our lotion, and all these chemicals. Turns out that's a real thing. I don't know that it'll make anybody shrink, but it's having an effect. So a forever chemical, do a search on that, you easily find a lot of information. Forever chemicals, we actually started the process of no longer making them back in 2000. But the effects are still with us, from what I can ascertain. These forever chemicals, plastics and different chemicals, the thing about them is once they get in a landfill or your body, they do different things and they're all bad. In the landfill, they get into the water, which winds up in your body. When it gets into your body, the thing that makes them a forever chemical is they don't ever go away. And many of them can't be filtered out by your system. And we've known forever, that we can get a metal buildup, certain metals can build up, and your body can't eliminate them. This is one of the things about colloidal silver. I use colloidal silver, but not inside my body. And this is pushed and hawked out there. It's a great topical antiseptic. It's natural and has there's a whole bunch of good things about it. It belongs on the outside of your body, not the inside of your body. There's no known use for silver inside your body. I've been waiting years to say that to somebody. Anyway, so I don't know about the silver. There's more than one kind of silver as well. Now, I make silver at home and use it for various things, but I don't put it inside my body. There are things that when you put them inside your body's not designed to filter those out and eliminate them. And some of those things are really good that God designed, like iron. Your red corpuscles have a center of iron, and when that corpuscle dies, your body sends it through the system, and it takes that piece of iron, and that iron is of a certain size. Iron is of a certain size that your kidneys can't eliminate it. So it goes back to your bone, and it makes a new red corpuscle. I mean, God's design is beyond genius. And this is the problem when you begin to take blood transfusions. You're adding little pieces of iron to your system, and you're only designed for a certain number of those. My dad got to the place before he died. For several years, he had to wear a device that extracted that somehow from his system because he was taking blood transfusions. He was adding that in, and you become toxic from the iron. Well, these forever chemicals, some of them get in us, and they can never get out. Plastics, they found that, we still need to use plastic straws. I don't care what anybody says. Okay. Do you have any questions or thoughts about this so far?
I think women that they're having babies older, so they don't have as many.
That's a big factor. People are waiting longer to get married and have children.
Right.
And, that factors into it. At 30 years of age, you're not as fertile as you are at 18.
Well,
That's an interesting point.
And then the gay community is not going to have too many children.
Oh, there you go again.
Take it too far.
Hey, it's a real thing.
Yeah.
He made them male and female for a reason. And I hate to even think about it or discuss it, but a bunch of those guys that are living with other guys, in a normal society, they would be living with other women and having babies. So I had never even thought about that. You may be smarter than I thought you were.
What's our everything?
Any other thoughts?
But how many of these men, say couples, adopt children?
Well, I just saw it today. Maryland, I think, is the first state to have passed legislature to recognize 3 adults.
3 males
There were 3 males in this case,
adopted.
but you could mix it up any way you wanted to,
And they are.
and I'm sure they are. But what I saw was 3 men that had adopted little babies and sitting in a hospital bed. When I thought we had reached the bottom, we keep finding it's deeper. So, it's coming. It is a whole bunch of things. And Jesus is Lord of all. He has a plan. You remember how QAnon had this plan? The president was about to enact martial law and he was going to be president for a second term. Remember that? Well, there were people who really wanted that to be true. I would really love for that to have been true, right? It wasn't. But I do know somebody who has a conspiracy afoot, and it's not a theory. He's going to make it happen. His name is Jesus. So get ready. Get your seatbelt on. It's going to be an interesting ride. And it's going to end up in a wonderful place. Okay, let's stand together and be dismissed with prayer.